Someone tells you the store is 500 meters away. Okay, have you walked 400 of them yet? No idea. 50? Also no idea. You have zero internal sense of what 500 meters feels like. Neither does anyone else. In 1799, France put a single platinum bar in the National Archives in Paris and said, "This is exactly 1 meter." Done. Argument over. 200 years later, we still can't feel it. NASA still describes asteroids as being the size of Manhattan. Journalists still describe wildfires as the size of 40 football fields, because somehow, a football field means something. A number doesn't. So what actually went wrong? Why did humanity spend centuries building the most precise measuring system in history, agreed on by nearly every country on Earth, and still end up describing the world using cities, buses, football fields, and apartment blocks? Because the meter was never built for your brain. It was built for engineers, for trade, for science. Your brain runs on a completely different operating system, and it was never updated. It doesn't matter how smart you are either. A physics professor who spends his whole life working with exact numbers still can't look at an empty parking lot and instantly know if it's 400 meters across or 600. He has to guess, just like everyone else. Being good at math doesn't fix this. This isn't a knowledge problem. It's a wiring problem. Here's why. In 1834, a scientist named Ernst Weber ran a simple test. He gave people weights to hold. He asked them to say when one felt heavier than the other. He found something odd. The exact difference in grams didn't matter. What mattered was the ratio. If you're holding 1 kilogram, you need to add about 100 grams before you feel a change. If you're holding 10 kilograms, you need a whole extra kilogram before you feel anything at all. Your senses don't measure the world in exact numbers. They measure it by comparison. This is called Weber's law. It shows up almost everywhere you sense the world. Sound, light, weight, and distance too. Your brain isn't built to understand 500 meters as a fixed amount. It's built to understand closer than that or farther than that. Always relative, never exact. That's the first reason a number like 500 meters means nothing to you. And there's more to it. In the 19th century, a scientist ran a test that's still repeated in labs today. He gave people 2 boxes. Same weight. One was big, one was small. Almost everyone said the small box felt heavier. Nothing about the actual weight changed. What changed was expectation. A big box looks like it should be heavy. So when it isn't heavier than the small one, your brain adjusts. It reports the small box as heavier than it really is. Your senses don't just report the world. They report the world compared to what your brain already expected. Size, weight, distance, all of it runs through the same system, a system built for comparison, not for clean numbers. Here's another clue, and this one is surprising. In the early 2000s, a psychologist named Proffitt at the University of Virginia asked people to guess how steep a hill was, just by looking, no instruments. People got it wrong almost every time. A hill with a real slope of 5 degrees got guessed at 20. A 10-degree hill got guessed at 30 or more. Then Proffitt changed one thing. He had some people wear a heavy backpack before guessing. The hill looked steeper. Not a little steeper, a lot steeper. Same people, same hill, just minutes apart. He tested this with tired people, older people, people in different levels of fitness. Every time, the pattern held. Your brain doesn't judge a hill like a neutral machine would. It judges the hill as a question about you. Can I climb this? What will it cost my body? Proffitt called this action-specific perception. Distance isn't something your brain measures about the world. It's something your brain measures about you. This idea goes back even further. In the 1970s, a psychologist named James Gibson said humans never really see raw size or distance at all. What we see is possibility. Gibson called this an affordance. A gap doesn't just have a width. It has a property. Can I fit through it or not? A chair isn't just an object with a height. It has a property. Can I sit on it? Your eyes aren't handing your brain a ruler. They're handing it an answer to one question, over and over. What can I do here? which means every unit you've ever felt in your body was never really about space. It was about you. That explains something very old. Long before anyone agreed on a meter, people measured almost everything using their own bodies. A foot, literally the length of a foot. A cubit, the length of a forearm. A fathom, the span of 2 arms stretched out. We still use that one today to measure ocean depth. Even a league, an old word you still see in fantasy books and maps, wasn't some abstract distance. It was simply how far a person could walk in 1 hour. An acre wasn't some abstract square either. It was the amount of land 1 man and 1 ox could plow in a day. None of these units came from a lab. They came from real bodies doing real things. And here's where it gets even more interesting, because this isn't just history. It's happening right now, in people who can't see distance at all. Some blind people learn to get around almost entirely using sound. They make sharp clicking noises with their tongue. They listen to the echo bouncing off walls, poles, parked cars, doorways. A researcher named Laura Thaler at Durham University scanned the brains of people who do this well. She found something remarkable. The clicks and echoes weren't processed in the hearing part of the brain. They lit up the visual cortex, the same part sighted people use to judge shape and distance with their eyes. The brain didn't care that the information came in as sound instead of light. It only cared about one thing: building a working sense of how far something is and how your body needs to move around it. Take away the eyes completely, and the brain rebuilds the same kind of map anyway, using whatever input it can get. Distance was never really about meters, or sound, or sight. It was always the same question, answered however the body could manage. How far in terms of me? Which brings us back to the football fields and the Manhattans. And this isn't laziness on the part of scientists or journalists. It's a translation, whether they realize it or not. A NASA press release could report an asteroid's exact size in meters. It often does, somewhere in the small print. But the headline says Manhattan, because whoever wrote it understood something Weber, Charpentier, Proffitt, and Gibson all proved decades apart. A number doesn't create a feeling. A body does. Tell someone an asteroid is 3.4 kilometers wide, and their brain files it away as data. Tell them it's the size of Manhattan, and their brain puts them on a street corner looking up. That's not a simplification for people who can't handle numbers. It's a translation into the only language your senses have ever actually spoken. A football field isn't a neutral length. It's a length you physically walked in gym class on a Saturday chasing a ball. A city block isn't a neutral distance. It's something you've paced out half asleep on the way to get coffee. Manhattan isn't a neutral area. For anyone who's been there, it's blocks, walked one after another, tired feet included. None of these comparisons are really about geometry. They're translations. They take a number your brain can't hold and quietly turn it back into a body, moving through space. The only unit your brain has ever actually trusted. So here's the real twist. The meter was supposed to replace all of that. One universal standard, no body required. The same in Paris, in Tokyo, in orbit. And it worked, completely. For machines, for contracts, for science. But it failed completely at the one thing it was actually built for. You. 200 years of standardization, and the moment a real person needs to actually feel a distance, we still reach for a football field, a city block, a hill your legs remember climbing. The bar in the archive won on paper. Your body never signed the agreement. That's what's happening every time you walk through a doorway without turning sideways. Every time you parallel park a car you've driven twice. Every time you glance at a gap in traffic and just know, without doing any math, whether you'll make it. It's what's happening when you reach for a shelf without looking, and your hand stops exactly where the shelf is. It's what's happening when you duck under a low doorway a half second before your head would have hit it, in a house you've never even visited before. Nobody told you the exact height. Nobody gave you a number. Something in you just looked once and knew. You're not measuring in meters in that moment. You never were. You're running the oldest measuring system humans ever built. The one written into muscle and instinct, long before anyone thought to put a number on it. And this is why the problem never actually went away, even with a phone in your pocket that can tell you the exact number. Open a map app right now. Ask it how far the coffee shop is. It will tell you. 500 meters. Precise, confident, correct. And you still won't feel it. You'll still glance up from your phone, look down the street, and try to guess with your eyes instead. You'll still think, that's about 2 blocks, before you think in meters at all. The number was right there the whole time. Your brain used it for about half a second, then quietly reached for something it could actually use. That's not you failing to understand technology. That's your brain doing exactly what it's always done, quietly and automatically. Taking a clean, correct number and converting it, instantly, back into a body walking down a real street. Somewhere inside you, right now, quietly, without asking permission, some old part of your brain is still doing exactly what it did 100,000 years ago, measuring the world in the only unit it ever fully, truly trusted: you.